This message comes from Capital One. The Capital One Venture X Business Card has no preset spending limit, so the card's purchasing power can adapt to meet business needs. Plus, the card earns unlimited double miles on every purchase, so the more a business spends, the more miles earned. And when traveling, the Venture X Business Card grants access to over 1,000 airport lounges. The Venture X Business Card. What's in your wallet? Terms and conditions apply. Find out more at CapitalOne.com/VentureXBusiness.
I've never felt like this before. It's like you just get me. I feel like my true self with you. Does that sound crazy? And it doesn't hurt that you're gorgeous. Okay, that's it. I'm taking you home with me. I mean, you can't find shoes this good just anywhere. Find a shoe for every you from brands you love, like Birkenstock, Nike, Adidas, and more at your DSW store or DSW.com.
Buffalo Bill, never missed and never will. Always aims and shoots to kill, and the company pays his Buffalo Bill. That charming little rhyme has long been associated with one of America's great myth makers, a showman by the name of William Cody, but you probably know him better as Buffalo Bill. Now, trying to pin the exact origin of that little poem is tricky. The story goes that it was originally composed by some unidentified workers for the Kansas Pacific Railway around the year 1867. At the time, William Cody was a buffalo hunter near the town of Sheridan, Kansas. He made a living tracking the still impressive herds of American bison that roamed the plain and selling the meat to railway workers. Bill had a reputation for being a crack shot and a reliable source for meat, even during the lean times. Cody would eventually claim that during his 2-year stint as a full-time buffalo hunter, he killed a remarkable 4,280 animals on the Kansas prairie. His railway worker customers were supposedly the first folks to start calling him Buffalo Bill. Their little rhyme about their favorite buffalo hunter was apparently so catchy that some of the local papers printed it for posterity. But the American West was filled with characters with colorful nicknames, and William Cody was far from the only Buffalo Bill out there making a name for himself on the frontier. We're told that one day it came to his attention that a certain William Comstock, a celebrated guide and hunter in his own right, was also using the name Buffalo Bill. Apparently, Comstock, who also lived in Kansas, was not happy that there was some other William traipsing around his home state using a nickname that he felt that he had earned. So a competition was proposed. In his autobiography, William Cody would describe the competition like this, quote, "We were to hunt one day of 8 hours, beginning at 8 o'clock in the morning. The wager was $500 a side, and the man who should kill the greater number of buffalo from horseback was to be declared the winner." End quote. Not only would that winner make away with a cheeky $500, he would also be awarded the title Champion Buffalo Hunter of the Plains and would be given the exclusive right to use the nickname Buffalo Bill. According to Cody, the contest was widely advertised on large posters that were sent as far afield as St. Louis, Missouri. And sure enough, on the day of the showdown, Cody recalled that, quote, "An excursion party whose members came chiefly from St. Louis and numbered nearly 100 ladies and gentlemen came on a special train to view the sport." End quote. The crowd gathered at a safe distance from where a buffalo herd was expected, and sure enough, by mid-morning the beasts came moving through. The two Bills charged into the herd, and both managed to dispatch an impressive number of bison. However, according to William Cody, he had a few advantages. First, was his swift horse, a reliable steed named Brigham. He also had a powerful rifle that he had colorfully named Lucretia Borgia, because nothing says, "I'm going to kill a giant buffalo," like the Italian Renaissance. Bill Cody also had a better strategy than his opponent. Instead of chasing after the herd and catching animals as he could, he cleverly herded the buffalo into a swirling, circular stampede. As the herd swirled around him, he picked off the buffalo at his leisure. Over the course of the day, the men took 3 runs into different herds that made their way through the designated competition area. The way William Cody told the tale, by the 3rd run, he had such a lead on Comstock that he started showboating for the crowd. The last buffalo he killed was purposely, quote, driven close to the wagons where the ladies were watching the contest. It frightened some of the tender creatures to see a buffalo coming at full speed directly towards them, but I dropped him in his tracks before he had got within 50 yards of the wagon. This finished my run with a score of 69 buffaloes for the day. Comstock had killed 46. End quote. So it was that William Cody handily secured the title of Champion Buffalo Hunter of the Plains and became the one and only Buffalo Bill. Or so goes the tale. You see, this famed buffalo hunt was just the beginning for Buffalo Bill Cody. He would go on to have a storied career as a scout for the United States Army, a bloodied veteran of wars with the Northern Cheyenne and Lakota people, and eventually the founder of the popular Wild West show. Buffalo Bill was a true American showman, hustler, and humbug artist. He would become the P.T. Barnum of the American West, and the fateful competition with William Comstock would go down as a key part of his origin myth. But much like P.T. Barnum, William Cody was a professional liar and one of the greatest purveyors of fake history to come out of the United States. He would become world famous by presenting a mythical version of the American West, the Wild West, to crowds of millions from New Orleans to London to Berlin. But to sell the authenticity of this experience, Buffalo Bill's personal profile needed to match the mythic grandeur of his imagined West. So he created a backstory that was suitably legendary. Part of this was the tale of the winner-take-nickname buffalo hunt. But it is almost certain that this one-day hunt-off with William Comstock never actually happened. The first known account of this story comes from Cody's 1879 autobiography, and no historian has been able to find any evidence that can corroborate Cody's version of events. Buffalo Bill claimed that the event was widely advertised, but not a single poster, pamphlet, or contemporary newspaper description has ever been uncovered. Despite the fact that Cody described the hunt being witnessed by around 100 spectators, not a single eyewitness account from the supposed championship event has ever been located. On top of that, historians have discovered that in 1867, at the time of the alleged competition, William Comstock was wanted for murder. It seems unlikely that he would have participated in a widely advertised public competition while he was actively on the run from the law. Also, there are very few references to William Comstock using the nickname Buffalo Bill. He was better known as Medicine Bill Comstock, which was a reference to his knowledge of traditional Cheyenne medicines. The historian and premier William Buffalo Bill Cody expert, Lewis S. Warren, has argued that the tale of the buffalo hunt with Comstock was a clever invention, likely fabricated for Cody's 1879 memoir. This story sought to absorb Comstock's growing myth into the Buffalo Bill legend. You see, in the late 1860s, William Comstock was famous in his own right. His exploits as a guide and a hunter were celebrated in the same magazines that made Buffalo Bill Cody a household name. But Comstock died at the young age of 26 in 1868. As the years passed, Comstock started appearing in memoirs written by Army commanders who remembered him as the so-called Ace of Scouts. Significantly, the famous U.S. cavalry commander George Armstrong Custer praised Medicine Bill as the greatest of all the Western Scouts. Custer notably said nothing about Buffalo Bill Cody. You see, Buffalo Bill made a career off the perception that he was the greatest scout hero of the American West. Having an august figure like Custer contradict that, well, that was bad for business. So a story was invented. Comstock was not ignored. He was just brought into the Buffalo Bill story as a friendly rival. In the myth, Cody handily defeated William Comstock, and in doing so became the undisputed Buffalo Bill. After that, any praise for the great Medicine Bill Comstock was by extension praise for Bill Cody. Medicine Bill might have been great, but Buffalo Bill was greater. But this was just one of many colorful inventions by Buffalo Bill Cody. In his quest for fame and respectability, the performer shaped both his life and the very history of the American West into something exciting, entertaining, and unimpeachably heroic. His version of the Wild West shaped the way his fellow Americans and foreign audiences came to understand the history of the country. Buffalo Bill told his audiences tales about rugged individualism and civilization overcoming savagery. All of this was tinged with a wistful nostalgia for a way of life that was going the way of the buffalo, as the expression went. Buffalo Bill has been credited with more or less inventing what we think of as the Western. The question is, how has that invention affected the popular understanding of American history? Let's see what we can find out today on Our Fake History. Episode number 240, Who Invented the Wild West, Part 1. Hello, and welcome to Our Fake History. My name is Sebastian Major, and this is the podcast where we explore historical myths and try to determine what's fact, what's fiction, and what is such a good story it simply must be told. Before we get going this week, I just want to remind everyone that you can hear this episode ad-free through Patreon. $5 or more every month gets you access to an ad-free feed and a ton of extras. But support at any level, and you can vote on the topic for our upcoming patrons-only extra. And it will get you access to that show once it is completed. And patrons, I need you to vote because we currently have a tie between the two most popular topics for that next extra show. They are the 7 Wonders of the Ancient World and the Viking presence in North America. There's always a chance that one of the other options up there could come back as a dark horse candidate. But we need people to weigh in because right now it's too close to call. Only about 50% of the patrons have voted. So at this point, every vote matters. So if you want to get in on this, then head to patreon.com/OurFakeHistory and start supporting at whatever level works for you. I think I'm the last person on the internet who still offers a $1 Patreon tier, so, what do you got to lose? Also, this is another reminder that we are going to Greece in 2026. If you want to join me on the journey of a lifetime through the historic sites of Athens, Crete, and beyond, then you got to get on board for this amazing experience. We are still looking to fill some spots on this trip, so please do not hesitate. Follow the link in the show notes or go to ourfakehistory.com and follow the links for the trip to check out the full itinerary and to book. If you book, don't forget to use the promo code OFH so they know that I sent you. This week, we are turning our attention to the mythology of the American West. Specifically, we are going to be looking at the life of a figure who arguably did more than anyone else to bring the legend of the West to the masses: Buffalo Bill Cody. Buffalo Bill has been best remembered as the showman behind Buffalo Bill's Wild West, an expansive Western-themed exposition that was part circus, part rodeo, and part historical reenactment. Between the years of 1883 and 1913, the Wild West show toured across the United States, Canada, and much of Europe. It's been estimated that literally millions of people saw some iteration of the Wild West show over the course of its 30-year existence. The show helps solidify a vision of the American West that persists in pop culture to this very day. This is the mythic frontier of the Western genre, a place where good and evil, wilderness and urbanity, civilization and savagery all contend with one another on the dust-blown plains. The popular stereotypes of quote-unquote cowboys and Indians are deeply tied to their representations in Bill Cody's Wild West shows. In most cases, Buffalo Bill did not invent these myths about the American frontier. The Wild West show simply confirmed, reinforced, and gave life to legends that have been popular for decades. But as I hope to explore, during the 19th century, the American West may have been one of the most self-consciously mythic places to have ever existed. Here's what I mean by that. Euro-American settlers were encouraged by Western boosters to imagine themselves as fulfilling a grand destiny and conquering a foreboding wilderness in the name of progress. But beyond that, the West was a place where someone could become famous for feats both heroic or villainous. Starting in the 1860s, dime store novels based on the supposedly real exploits of people living in the West became hugely popular. People living in these Western territories became aware of the fact that being a colorful character with a catchy nickname and a penchant for adventure might just catch the attention of a novelist. That novelist could then transform you into something like a 19th century superhero, or, as the case may be, supervillain. Buffalo Bill was someone who realized that living a myth-friendly life on the plain could be a path to wealth and fame. Even before Buffalo Bill Cody became a professional actor and then circus impresario, he was a performer. Around the time that William Cody started hunting buffalo for the Kansas Pacific Railroad in the late 1860s, he seems to have become aware of the fact that a flashy presentation could go a long way to elevate what was an otherwise humble profession. Buffalo hunting was hard labor and yielded a type of meat that was more tolerated than loved by settlers and railway workers. And yet, the buffalo hunt held a certain romance, especially in the imaginations of Eastern Americans and Europeans. With a little hustle, a little storytelling, and a touch of nostalgia, the buffalo hunt could be transformed into a spectator sport, and the buffalo hunter into an American hero. By the 1870s, Buffalo Bill Cody had turned his entire life into a performance. And by the 1880s, he made the entire western United States into a vaudeville show. Bill Cody's ability to blur fact and fiction ended up having a remarkable impact on the popular perception of American history. By making the West a show, he turned history into show business, and we are arguably still living with the fallout. Now, before we go any further, I think it's important to acknowledge that while this story will sometimes feel like a lighthearted look at a bygone age of American entertainment, it also deals with some very heavy and violent episodes in North American history. Buffalo Bill was deeply involved in the wars that were fought between the indigenous groups of the Great Plain and the American government. As such, some sources you encounter when researching this period are often very flippant, disrespectful, or explicitly racist when it comes to the lives of indigenous people. As you will hear, Buffalo Bill promoted himself as one of the West's most storied, quote-unquote, Indian fighters. He openly bragged about his indigenous body count and displayed trophies that he stole from the people that he had killed. This series is going to be dealing with that violence, and I'm going to be doing my best to be as respectful and as thoughtful as I can in my approach. I just want to recognize that this stuff can be difficult and that the way that these killings are talked about in the sources can be jarring. So while the sources may be flip at times, I just want to remember that these people were human beings. The historical sources for this period also use the term Indian as a catch-all term for all of North America's first people. Now, we should recognize that this term is generally not preferred by Indigenous people, although I am aware that a debate around its usage continues among First Nations folks. My approach has always been to use the names of specific nations and ethnic groups wherever possible. But in this series, the term Indian will come up in the historical sources and will be used in certain contexts by the scholars that I'm referencing. You've already heard me say it a few times. As always, my goal is to be thoughtful and accurate, and hopefully not careless. I will do my best. Okay, so let's start breaking this down. Buffalo Bill's Wild West show was all about authenticity, or at least the illusion of authenticity. Bill advertised himself as the ideal guide through frontier history and culture because he had lived an authentically Western life. And in those spots where his life did not seem authentic enough, well, that was nothing a little spit shine couldn't cure. So, let's get into it. Who was William Cody, and how did he transform himself into Buffalo Bill? Today's episode of Our Fake History is being brought to you by Rosetta Stone. The holidays are coming up, and there's nothing more meaningful than learning something new. Whether you want to reconnect with family roots, prep for an upcoming trip, or give someone a gift that actually lasts, Rosetta Stone is the perfect way to start something special. Rosetta Stone has been the trusted leader in language learning for over 30 years. Their immersive, intuitive method helps you truly pick up your new language naturally. No memorizing random vocabulary lists, no feeling lost. As many of you know, I have been on a quest to improve my French. My oldest kid is currently in French immersion, and I've had to do my best to keep up. Well, Rosetta Stone has really helped with the process. With Rosetta Stone, you can learn anytime, anywhere. It fits your lifestyle with flexible, on-the-go learning. You can access lessons from your desktop or your mobile app, whether you have 5 minutes or an hour. So don't wait. Unlock your language learning potential now. Our Fake History listeners can grab Rosetta Stone's lifetime membership for 50% off. That's unlimited access to 25 language courses for life. Visit rosettastone.com/history to get started and claim your 50% off today. Give a gift that keeps on giving. Go to rosettastone.com/history and start learning today. This episode of Our Fake History is being brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy. Just drop in some details about yourself and see if you're eligible to save money when you bundle your home and auto policies. The process only takes minutes, and it could mean hundreds more in your pocket. Visit progressive.com after this episode to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states. Buffalo Bill Cody is one of those people who made his life story into an essential part of the showbiz product that he was selling. The Wild West show was presented as an authentic tour through the history and culture of the American West. Buffalo Bill was your guide, and he was the perfect man for the job because he claimed to have lived everything that was being presented. His biography was the history of the Old West, or at least that's what he wanted his audience to believe. In this way, Buffalo Bill presented himself as something like a cowboy Forrest Gump, a guileless but lovable everyman who found himself right in the middle of every significant historical event on the Great Plain, from the time he was born in 1846 to the start of his show business career in 1873. Now, much of what we know about Bill's early life comes from his autobiography, published in 1879. And as you may have already guessed, that book is not especially reliable. It's an amazing source if you are looking for the Buffalo Bill myth, but it only loosely follows the verifiable facts of his life. It's taken the work of many dedicated biographers to piece together a more accurate picture of Bill Cody's early life. Chief among them, Lewis Warren, whose book Buffalo Bill's America has been an essential source for this series. So shout out to Lewis Warren. But we know that William Cody was born in Iowa in 1846. His father was Canadian, and the family lived for a time just outside of Toronto. That kind of blew my mind. Before they packed up and resettled in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas in 1853. Now, we're told that the birth of William Cody, the Cody family's third child and second son, was regarded as the fulfillment of a mystical prophecy. Allegedly, 7 years before he was born, William's mother, Mary, saw a traveling fortune teller who told her that she would meet her husband that very week on a steamboat. She would have 3 sons with that man, and only one, the second son, would live. But his name would be known all over the world. And sure enough, Mary fell in love on a steamboat with a man named Isaac Cody the very next day. And soon the two were married. The first part of the prophecy was fulfilled. Now, many modern Buffalo Bill experts find this story a little suspicious, but it's one that can neither be confirmed nor denied. We have no idea if this happened or not, but it does seem a little too perfect that Buffalo Bill's fame was foretold by a fortune teller. But who knows? What we do know is that when the Codys came to Kansas, they very quickly found themselves embroiled in that territory's antebellum politics. This was during the period when Kansas was riven by violence over the question of whether or not it would become a slave state when it officially joined the Union. The violence earned the territory the nickname Bleeding Kansas. Bill's father, Isaac Cody, supported keeping Kansas a free state and started publicly speaking to that effect. This angered violent groups of pro-slavery Kansans, and the Codys soon found themselves harassed and threatened by gangs. This came to a head when Isaac Cody was stabbed by a slavery advocate. He survived the attack, but he never fully recovered. He would die around a year later from a respiratory infection. Bill's oldest brother had also tragically died a few years earlier. So this meant that at the tender age of 11, William Cody was in a position where he had to provide for his mother and 4 sisters. Obviously, this was an incredibly difficult situation, but in Bill's autobiography, it's presented as the beginning of a grand adventure. You see, at the age of 11, Bill became the rugged Western individual of myth, filled with grit and a never-say-die attitude. He immediately set to doing whatever he could to make money for his family. This meant working as a messenger for a wagon train heading west, traveling to Colorado to pan for gold, and volunteering as a teenage scout in the so-called Utah Wars between the U.S. government and Mormon settlers. According to Bill, by the time he was 12, he had already killed a man, a Lakota warrior in full battle regalia. Now, it's hard to verify this particular story, but it's worth noting that there's a certain casualness to the way he describes the event in his autobiography. The death isn't given much ink, and it's simply used to establish Bill's credentials as an enemy to the native people of the West, or, as he blithely puts it in his book, quote, "So began my career as an Indian fighter," end quote. He wanted his readers to know that he had been killing Lakota warriors since he was a baby, like Hercules strangling snakes in his crib. One of the key myths from Bill's early life was his time as a Pony Express rider. Now, the Pony Express is itself something of a Western myth. The Pony Express was a mail delivery service that was established in 1860. It used a relay system of horseback riders that could deliver messages between St. Joseph, Missouri, and Sacramento, California in an impressive 10 days. This was more than double the speed of the traditional stagecoach deliveries. Every 15 miles or so along the Pony Express, there would be a different way station where riders could switch off, get fresh horses, load up on new bags of mail, and then continue on to the next stop. Now, given the size of the Pony Express myth, it can be a little disorienting to learn that the Pony Express only existed for 18 months, from April 1860 to November of 1861. The completion of the telegraph to California in late 1861 made the service obsolete. A year and a half, that's it. That's the whole history of the Pony Express. But despite that, the Pony Express has become a beloved emblem of the Old West, a quaint yet ingenious way to move mail quickly in the age before the railways and the telegraph lines. The bravery and determination of the Pony Express riders has also been celebrated as one of the great examples of the Western American spirit. Now, this is partially thanks to Buffalo Bill, who made a reenactment of Pony Express rides and lightning-fast horse exchanges a memorable part of his Wild West show. Buffalo Bill told his audience that he understood the Pony Express better than most because he was not only the youngest Pony Express rider in history, he was also the greatest rider to ever do the job. He claimed that at the age of 14, after an unsuccessful stint panning for gold, he found his way to a Pony Express station in Julesburg, Colorado, where he talked the local station chief into giving him a job as a rider. He apparently rode for 2 months that year, consistently making 15 miles an hour on horseback and never once arriving late for a mail drop. Then, a year later, he returned to the Pony Express looking for work again, and was nearly turned away before he was recognized as the, quote, youngest rider on the road, end quote. During that second stint, he allegedly pulled off one of the greatest feats of riding in the company's history. After coming off a marathon 76-mile ride, he arrived at a pony station in Three Crossings, Wyoming, only to discover that the rider who was supposed to relieve him, a fellow named Charles Miller, had been killed the night before in a drunken brawl. Now, most men would just curse their luck and wait for a replacement, but the 15-year-old Bill was committed to getting the mail delivered on time. So he saddled up a fresh horse and rode another 85 miles until he came to a way station where a fresh rider could take over. Then Bill turned around and rode all the way back to his starting point, making a total journey of 320 miles in an astounding 21 hours and change. This was apparently the greatest distance ever traversed by a Pony Express rider in so little time. Now, is any of this true? Most experts are highly skeptical. First, we have no hard evidence that Bill ever worked for the Pony Express at all. Unfortunately, the company did not keep an official list of riders, but we do have the 1860 census, which lists the station master and 2 riders operating out of the Julesburg, Colorado Pony Express station. Neither of those riders were named William Cody. Also, Bill's story about being hired by a station master doesn't fit with what we know was the typical Pony Express protocol. Station masters didn't hire new riders. Only division agents, which were like area supervisors, had that kind of power. Finally, the story of the marathon ride also doesn't square with some established historical facts. Remember Charles Miller, Cody's supposed relief rider at Three Crossings? Well, it turns out that a man by that name was indeed killed in a drunken brawl, but it didn't happen near Three Crossings. It instead happened at a spot known as Gilbert Station, which was over 100 miles away from Three Crossings. Further, that killing was in 1859, 2 years too early for him to be riding the Pony Express at the same time as Bill Cody. Now, did Buffalo Bill just mix up some of the details in his remembrance? Possibly, but it's just as likely that he made the whole thing up. This is yet another example of Cody's great talent. He took a legendary Western institution, the Pony Express, and he folded it in to his own legend. And in doing so, he inflated the mythological status of both. Buffalo Bill is like a myth blob. You know, the blob from that cheesy 1960s horror movie? If you don't know, it's this big ball of goo that just absorbs things and grows as it takes more in. Well, that's like Buffalo Bill. Every time he absorbs a myth, he just gets bigger. After the outbreak of the American Civil War, Bill found his way back to Kansas. At first, he was too young to enlist in the Union Army, and for a time, he fell in with a group of brigands known as the Redlegs, who raided across the border into Missouri. These guys were little more than bandits, but because they did their raiding on the Confederate side of the line, Union officials were happy to turn a blind eye. Eventually, when Bill came of age, he found his way into the Union Army. He earned the rank of private and worked mostly as a teamster driving supply carts. He would later claim that he worked as a scout and a guide for the Union Army, but there's no evidence of that, and that would have been highly irregular for someone at his rank. Once the war was over, he married, fathered a daughter, and started to make a name for himself as a buffalo hunter. Now, in the introduction, we already talked a bit about some of the key myths from that era in his life. But there's little doubt that while hunting buffalo for the Kansas Pacific Railway, he really started to develop a character. He became locally famous as a capable hunter. He earned a catchy nickname and even had a couplet written about him. Buffalo Bill, never missed and never will. Early on, he thought he could take a bit of the fame and money that he had earned as a buffalo hunter and reinvent himself as a town founder. Bill and a friend did their best to get a settlement called Rome, Kansas underway, but when the railway chose to pass them by, the town soon flopped. By 1868, he found a new calling, and that was working as a civilian guide for the U.S. Army on the plains. After the Civil War, the American government continued its pressure on independent indigenous nations in the Great Plains region. The tail end of the 19th century was defined by a series of brutal conflicts between the U.S. and a long list of indigenous groups, including the Lakota, the Northern Cheyenne, the Arapaho, the Comanche, and the Kiowa. During these conflicts, which were fought on and off for decades, the U.S. Army began to rely more heavily on civilian scouts who knew the territory. The one advantage that many of the indigenous groups had in these fights was a deep knowledge of the terrain and the geography of the Great Plain. So the U.S. Army started to rely on the expertise of local trappers and hunters to help them navigate the theater of war. Many of these scouts were indigenous people. These were folks from groups that found themselves aligned with the U.S. government at various points in the late 19th century. These indigenous scouts were widely recognized to be some of the very best at the job. But interestingly, the Euro-Americans who also took these guiding jobs often presented themselves as though they were partially indigenous. This character type has been called the quote-unquote white Indian by people who study this phenomenon. The idea was that these white frontiersmen would embody the positive stereotypes associated with indigenous people and none of the negative stereotypes. They presented themselves as great trackers and hunters who were close to the land and read signs in the wind and grass invisible to others. They were savants who were spiritually connected to the plain. But in the eyes of racially minded 19th century Americans, the fact that these guides were of European stock meant that they were safer and more trustworthy than real indigenous people. The white Indian was a white person with the supposed superpowers of a Lakota warrior. When Buffalo Bill started guiding in 1868, he really started leaning into this persona. He grew his hair long, which suggested the look of an indigenous warrior. He started wearing buckskins, which were deeply associated with the first people of the plains. As Lewis Warren has pointed out, even before he became well known as a guide, he started playing the role of the ideal frontier scout. Warren writes, quote, "Photos from the late 1860s and early 1870s show him in the costume of the white Indian, buckskin, rifle, and long dark hair. His appearance as a guide borrowed so heavily from fictional representations of the profession that the people who followed him invariably wondered how much they should believe his act, end quote. So, in other words, Buffalo Bill leaned so hard into the white Indian shtick when he was guiding for the U.S. Army that some people found it to be a little crass. Was Buffalo Bill just a poser? Well, partially. But he did do some legitimately impressive things that helped him rise through the ranks. In 1868, he caught the attention of the Army General Philip Sheridan, who met Bill after he had made a perilous ride from Fort Larned to deliver dispatches to Sheridan's base at Fort Hays. Sheridan was then impressed that the guide was up for making yet another dangerous ride all the way to Dodge to convey another set of important messages. In the end, Bill rode around 350 miles in just 60 hours. After making this ride, Bill was officially promoted to Chief of Scouts for Sheridan's detachment. Now, there are some who are a little skeptical of this story, as it seems to mirror Buffalo Bill's Pony Express tale, the impossibly long ride to deliver a desperately needed message. I think I've heard this one before. But in this case, we have the testimony of Philip Sheridan to corroborate what Bill tells us in his autobiography. However, as we will see, later in life, many U.S. Army vets found themselves obliged to support Buffalo Bill's fictions just to draft off of his celebrity. It's not clear that that's what happened in this case, but that was a thing that could happen. Still, for the most part, experts seem to believe that this story is probably true. But with that said, we do know that Bill Cody exaggerated and lied about his time as a guide from 1868 to 1869. For instance, once the Wild West show got going in 1883, he started claiming that he had killed a Cheyenne leader known as Tall Bull at the Battle of Summit Springs. Tall Bull was the commander of a legendary group of Cheyenne warriors known as the Dog Soldiers. In promotional materials for his show, Bill claimed that he had personally shot the leader. Other materials depicted Bill and Tall Bull fighting hand-to-hand with knives. Neither of these things happened. Buffalo Bill was at the Battle of Summit Springs, but he likely had nothing to do with the death of Tall Bull. There were many eyewitnesses whose recollections of that battle were recorded, and none of them remembered Buffalo Bill being anywhere near the Cheyenne leader when he died. Most accounts claim that Tall Bull fell in a hail of bullets, and that it was impossible to know who exactly ended his life. He certainly did not fight Buffalo Bill hand to hand. But once again, we have an instance of Buffalo Blob absorbing the legend of another mythic figure and making it part of his own. As we will see, the idea of duels with famous indigenous leaders would become a bit of an obsession for Buffalo Bill. But the real turning point for Bill came in 1869, when he met a hack writer and would-be theater promoter named Ned Buntline. Buntline was a somewhat shady figure who had had a rocky but eventful career in publishing. In 1869, he hit a bit of a rough patch and soon found himself touring the country giving lectures about the virtues of temperance, lectures that were usually undercut by the fact that he was often drunk by the time that he made his speech. But while on this tour, he always kept a lookout for good stories. While in California, Ned started imagining a story based on the experience of an Army scout who had served at the Battle of Summit Springs. He specifically had in mind a scout named Frank North. North had no interest in being the fodder for cheap entertainment, but he knew a guy who might, Bill Cody. In Buffalo Bill, Ned Buntline had everything he needed. Cody was a colorful character who dressed the part of the ideal frontier guide, and he had an amazing nickname. Now, interestingly, Buntline would later claim that he actually invented the nickname Buffalo Bill. That is hotly disputed, but honestly, I find it plausible. Who knows? But with Bill's permission, Buntline set about creating a serialized story called Buffalo Bill, King of the Bordermen. This was originally done for the newspaper New York Weekly. The story was a huge hit, and soon it was picked up and serialized again, this time on the front page of the Chicago Tribune. It was then released as a dime store novel and became one of the genre's best sellers. Within a year, Buffalo Bill was legitimately famous. The plot of Buffalo Bill, King of the Bordermen, was almost entirely fictional, but it made Bill a household name and completely changed his life. Up to 1870, Buffalo Bill had been living an exceptionally performative life, but after his success as a dime store novel hero, he was ready to become a full-on performer. So let's pause here, and when we come back, we will get into the next act of the Buffalo Bill tale, fulfilling his destiny as a bad actor. Today's episode of Our Fake History is being brought to you by Shopify. The origins of this podcast were once just a dream, and that dream turned into a podcast, and that podcast accidentally turned into a business, and I'm still trying to figure it out, friends. Well, starting your own business is a dream that a lot of us share, but too many of us let it remain just a dream. Don't hold yourself back thinking, what if I don't have the skills? What if I can't do it alone? To be honest, I have had those doubts myself. Well, turn those what ifs into why nots with Shopify by your side. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world and 10% of all e-commerce in the United States, from household names like Mattel and Gymshark to brands just getting started. Hey, what if I can't design a website? Shopify's got you from the get-go with beautiful, ready-to-go templates to match your brand style. Hey, what if people haven't heard about my brand? Shopify helps you find your customers with easy-to-run email and social media campaigns. Hey, what if I get stuck? Well, Shopify's always around to share advice with their award-winning 24/7 customer support. Turn those dreams into... and give them the best shot at success with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/fake. Go to shopify.com/fake. Shopify.com/fake. By 1872, William Cody had already lived several lives. He'd been a cross-border bandit, a reluctant infantryman, a failed town founder, a commercial hunter, and then finally, a civilian guide for the American Army. But I think it's safe to say that in 72, Buffalo Bill finally found his real calling, and that was show business. In that year, Ned Buntline's novel, Buffalo Bill, King of the Bordermen, was adapted for the stage, and premiered in New York City in February. Bill Cody made the trip all the way to the Big Apple to attend opening night and see firsthand how his legend had been translated to the stage. But when it was learned that Cody was in the audience that night, the actor playing Buffalo Bill in the performance stopped the show and insisted that the real man take the stage and make an impromptu speech. The stunned Cody apparently stumbled through some polite words of thanks before beating a hasty retreat off the stage. He was not a natural actor, but Ned Buntline recognized how delighted the crowd had been to see the real Buffalo Bill. It was a touch anticlimactic to have some actor go on playing Bill once the crowd had seen the genuine article. So it was Ned Buntline who first had the idea that Buffalo Bill should play himself on stage. The plays could be advertised as featuring the real Buffalo Bill. And part of the charm was that Bill was not a trained actor. To a certain type of working and middle-class American theatergoer at the time, this was very attractive. Cody biographer Lewis Warren explains, quote, "The audacious leap to the stage by a man with no theatrical training appealed to a public which still preferred innate talent or natural genius to educated skill. Just as they preferred the militiaman to the professional soldier, in the theater they loved watching the amateur dramatist upstage professional actors," end quote. Many of the early Buffalo Bill plays were crudely drawn Western melodramas that really had nothing to do with Bill's actual life. These were usually stories about Buffalo Bill and a posse of colorful friends rescuing a kidnapped Western belle. The villains in these shows were a rogues gallery of wildly offensive racial and religious stereotypes. As you might expect, indigenous tribespeople became bloodthirsty savages. Mexicans were mustache-twirling banditos. The Irish were drunken louts. And in a surprising number of the shows, the antagonists were polygamous Mormons who were presented as sex-crazed cultists. Now, at the time, none of this was new. The novelty came with the fact that the real Buffalo Bill was on stage, and he was known to forget his lines, break the fourth wall, and joke with the audience. At one performance that was attended by his wife, Bill apparently broke character as soon as he saw her in the crowd and said, quote, "Oh, mama, I am a bad actor," end quote. The crowd apparently loved it. The fumbling performances were savaged by the critics, but audiences ate it up. Within a year, Bill Cody had learned that playing the character of Buffalo Bill could be incredibly lucrative. By 1873, he had parted ways with Ned Buntline and had formed his own theater company known as the Buffalo Bill Combination. With this new theater company came new plays, which started to be based a bit more closely on Bill Cody's life and adventures. But this is where fact and fiction really start to blur in the life of Buffalo Bill. The plays were still crude melodramas, but as Bill became more comfortable on stage, he started claiming that the shows were, in fact, historically accurate. What started as a lark, kind of a type of anti-theater where audiences would have fun watching a real country bumpkin mock the pretenses of urban theater going, became a real means of furthering the Buffalo Bill myth. Once Bill Cody started putting his life on stage, it seems to have changed the way he lived his life off stage. He started making decisions and seeking out experiences that he knew would eventually make for good theater. And this really blows my mind, so forgive me if I linger on this. But Buffalo Bill purposefully made his life more theatrical so it would be easier for him to adapt his life for the stage. You see, Buffalo Bill was not the only person playing himself on stage in the 1870s. For a moment, this was a bit of a trend in American theater. One New York Times correspondent even mused that, quote, the drama of the future would be the illustration of current history through the painting of actual events by the real actors in them, end quote. The writer went on to guess that eventually anyone involved in any notable happening would be expected to become an actor and present an adapted version of the event for an audience. But the worry was that people hungry for fame would seek out, quote, strange adventures or dangerous perils with the idea of acquiring attractive material for success on the boards, end quote. Now, this New York Times piece, which I found quoted in Lewis Warren's book on Buffalo Bill, really stopped me in my tracks because he seems to be describing the 19th century equivalent of social media influencer culture. The drama of the future has come to pass, my friends. Think of all the people on Instagram or TikTok presenting theatrical, semi-fictional versions of their own lives for an online audience. I couldn't help but think of all the people that quite literally seek out strange adventures and dangerous perils for the clicks. How many Instagram daredevils have died falling from a great height, all in the name of churning out some exciting content? Attractive material for success on the boards, indeed. By the late 1870s, Buffalo Bill Cody seems to have been driven by the same instinct. In fact, one of the most violent, gruesome, and frankly sickening moments in Bill's life seems to have been motivated by a desire to expand his myth and get fodder for his stage show. You see, in the 1870s, as Bill was reinventing himself as an actor and a theater impresario, he remained connected to the world of scouting in the American West. He believed that he needed to return occasionally to scouting so he could keep up his bona fides as a great frontiersman. If he was playing the greatest scout in the West on stage, then he needed to, at least occasionally, dip his toe into some real scouting. In 1876, the Black Hills War had broken out. Sometimes called the Great Sioux War, this was a massive conflict between the Lakota and Northern Cheyenne people and the government of the United States. The war was largely over the territory of the Black Hills in what is today South Dakota, an area that was believed to be sacred by both the Lakota and the Cheyenne. Now, like all human conflicts, the Black Hills War was complex and deserves a thoughtful dissection. But that is a bit beyond the scope of what we are doing here today. If you want a very thorough and thoughtful breakdown of this conflict in podcast form, then might I suggest the series that was done by my friend Daniele Bolelli for his podcast History on Fire. That's a great place to start. But to understand the story I'm about to tell you, you need to know that one of the best remembered battles from this conflict was the Battle of Little Bighorn. This battle was an overwhelming victory for the Lakota and the Northern Cheyenne. More than 260 United States cavalrymen fell at Little Bighorn, including the commander, George Armstrong Custer. When Custer died, he was already well known as a storied veteran of conflicts on the plains. But after Custer's death at Little Bighorn, he was transformed into a martyr for the cause of Western expansionism. Now, don't get me wrong here. There are a lot of different ways that one can feel about George Armstrong Custer. Many have argued that Custer was a genocidal war criminal. The historian and former director of the National Congress of American Indians, Vinay Victor Deloria Jr., once called Custer the, quote, Adolf Eichmann of the Plains, end quote. Now, the day may come when I properly litigate George Custer's life and legacy on this podcast. He probably deserves the full Our Fake History treatment. But for now, you need to understand that in the 1870s, the Battle of Little Bighorn was perceived by many white Americans as a tragedy. Custer was elevated to the status of a doomed hero, like Leonidas at Thermopylae. The Battle of Little Bighorn became better known in most of America as Custer's Last Stand. Now, cut back to our guy, Buffalo Bill. Bill was working as a scout for the U.S. Army when the Battle of Little Bighorn happened. But he was a solid 150 miles away with a completely different detachment of troops. He had nothing to do with the Battle of Little Bighorn. But Buffalo Bill had become deeply attuned to what Western events could become legendary. Custer's Last Stand was quickly becoming a Western myth. So Bill did his best to absorb that myth into his own. Ironically, we know that George Armstrong Custer never really thought much of Buffalo Bill. He wrote him off as a bit of a poser. But that hardly mattered when it came to the making of a myth. In July of 1876, around 1 month after the Battle of Little Bighorn, Buffalo Bill's commander, Colonel Wesley Merritt, set up an ambush for a group of Cheyenne warriors near a small waterway known as War Bonnet Creek, near what is today the border of Nebraska and Wyoming. Knowing that there was going to be some action that day, Buffalo Bill chose to dress for the occasion. He wore a stage costume made from black velvet, decorated with a red satin sash, silver buttons, and pants that flared at the knee. Now, this was a preposterously flashy thing to be wearing for a sneak attack. But Bill had a plan. When the Cheyenne first made contact with the enemy that day, they quickly realized that they were outnumbered and beat a hasty retreat. Bill and a group of scouts started to pursue the fleeing Cheyenne. Now, by all accounts, this was a very minor skirmish, but Buffalo Bill was about to transform it into something a bit more theatrical. But frankly, it was kind of ghoulish. Bill Cody would later claim that as he bore down on this group of Cheyenne, one of the Cheyenne leaders, a sub-chief known as Yellow Hair, his true name was Heovaehe, turned and challenged him to a duel. Bill would describe the event like this. The warrior, quote, who was elaborately decorated with all the ornaments usually worn by a great chief when he engaged in a fight, saw me and sang out, "I know you, Powhasqa. Come and fight with me." The name he used was one by which I had long been known by the Indians. It meant long yellow hair. The chief was riding his horse to and fro in front of me in order to banter me. I concluded to accept his challenge. I turned and galloped toward him for 50 yards, and he rode toward me about the same distance. Both of us rode at full speed. When we were only 30 yards apart, I raised my rifle and fired. His horse dropped dead under him, and he rolled over the ground to clear himself of the carcass. Almost at the same instant, my own horse stepped into a hole and fell heavily. The fall hurt me but little, and almost instantly I was on my feet. This was no time to lie down and nurse slight injuries. The chief and I were now both on our feet, not 20 paces apart. We fired at each other at the same instant. My usual luck held. His bullet whizzed harmlessly past my head, while mine struck him full in the breast. He reeled and fell, but I took no chances. He had barely touched the ground when I was upon him, knife in hand, and to make sure of him, drove the steel into his heart." End quote. Then to really add insult to injury, Cody continued, quote, "Jerking his war bonnet off, I scientifically scalped him in about 5 seconds." End quote. As the rest of the cavalry rode in to support him, Bill apparently waved both the headdress and Heovaehe's recently severed top knot and yelled, quote, "The first scalp for Custer," end quote. Within a couple years, Buffalo Bill had taken this bloody fight and turned it into a successful play titled The Red Right Hand, or The First Scalp for Custer. Now, as you might have already guessed, Buffalo Bill's recollection of this event is not particularly reliable. No one denies that Bill Cody killed and mutilated the body of Heovaehe, aka Yellow Hair, but the gallant duel was a total invention. According to Cody expert Lewis Warren, other eyewitnesses that day recalled that, quote, "Cody and Yellow Hair encountered each other suddenly, by accident, and the two men fired simultaneously," end quote. Now, if you are a dedicated listener to Our Fake History, then this might be sounding a little familiar, because this mythical duel has a lot in common with the elephant duel from 16th century Thailand that we discussed a few weeks ago. And honestly, it always blows my mind when weird, unintentional themes like this emerge in the show. In both cases, there was a real fight, but it was messy and dictated by random chance. But in the retelling, it became something like a knightly joust. Buffalo Bill seems to have invented the detail about being formally challenged by his opponent. He claims that Yellow Hair knew him by a nickname that was already infamous among the Cheyenne. Now, this was completely untrue. Buffalo Bill added this detail because it made him look even more impressive to his intended audience. He wanted them to believe that he was legendary even among the Cheyenne. The truth is that these men did not get a chance to exchange words, and even if they had had the chance, they wouldn't have been able to communicate with one another. These men did not speak the same language. Now, I don't really know what to make of the fact that Bill claimed that his nickname among the Cheyenne was Long Yellow Hair, and the man that he killed was also named Yellow Hair. I don't know about that. That's just confusing. But it's clear that the story of the challenge was used to make things seem more chivalrous. The knightly joust that he describes simply does not square with any of the other eyewitness accounts. But it is true that Buffalo Bill robbed the fallen body of the Cheyenne leader, taking his feathered war bonnet, his knife, his pistol, his shield, his saddle, and a few other personal effects. It's also true that Bill mutilated the corpse and took the man's scalp. All of these grisly souvenirs became part of the promotion for Bill's stage show. Almost immediately, he had all of these things shipped east, where they were displayed in a friend's cigar shop window in Rochester, New York. Eventually, the war prizes became part of Buffalo Bill's touring show and were usually displayed in the lobby of theaters where he performed. You could watch the play, The First Scalp for Custer, and then head to the lobby and examine that very scalp. These human remains became emblems of Buffalo Bill's supposed authenticity. Everything about this event kind of makes my head spin. Cody dressed in a costume that day, just in case something stage-worthy might happen. And sure enough, he got his wish. And from then on in was able to take the stage in the costume and say, hey, this is the very thing I was wearing when I avenged George Custer. He was motivated to mutilate a person's body because he knew it would make for good theater. Or, as the kids were so recently saying, he did it for the clout. Bill Cody's retelling of this event also served to elevate what would have likely been a forgotten skirmish into the fabled Battle of War Bonnet Creek. It's possible that Yellowhair was the only person that actually died in this confrontation. Cody also proved successful in forever linking himself to George Armstrong Custer. Again, I'll turn to Lewis Warren, who explains that, quote, Buffalo Bill became not only Custer's avenger, but the first of those avengers. All others were imitations, except no substitutes, end quote. For a time, thanks to Buffalo Bill's theater company, the first scalp for Custer became just as well known in the United States as Custer's Last Stand. Now, I've been doing this podcast for quite some time, and I'm not sure I've ever encountered anyone else who so clearly and self-consciously set out to make fake history. Sure, people lie all the time. People exaggerate. We've looked at lots of events that have been molded into a mythical shape after the fact. But rarely do you see someone get up in the morning and dress themselves for a day of myth-making. It's quite something. But one of the great ironies of Buffalo Bill's stage career is that the better he got at it, the more it hurt his popularity. After enjoying a successful run with the Red Right Hand, interest in his plays started to dip. The novelty of seeing a frontiersman play at being an actor was always bound to be short-lived. Eventually, Bill evolved from being charmingly bad on stage to being serviceably mediocre, but this made his shows a little less fun. By the early 1880s, Bill Cody realized that audiences wanted something new. He began imagining a different kind of spectacle, the kind of show that could encompass everything that the West had come to represent in the American mind. Something big, something exciting, something wild. Okay, that's all for this week. Join us again in 2 weeks' time when we will be continuing our look at Buffalo Bill and the Wild West show. If any questions popped into your mind while you were listening to this episode, please send them to me at ourfakehistory@gmail.com. Or if you are a patron, go to the chat area on the Patreon page and chime in there. I will be answering questions about this series in an upcoming bonus episode. And speaking of patrons, before we go this week, as always, I need to give some special shout-outs. Big ups to Kathy Pop, to Rob Callahan, to Sloppy Corn, to Andrew Fordyce, to Blaine, to Istvan Rooms, to young Colin going forward in time to remove the sponge like in the Green Mile. Okay, Colin. I like that. To Mary Chandler, to Jonathan Labriola, to Landon Castleman, to Connor Daly, to Greg Anderson, to Ken Goldsmith, to Damian Stansbury, and to Hillary. All of these folks have decided to pledge at $5 or more every month on Patreon. And you know what that means. They are beautiful human beings. Folks, you know I love a good joke name. Keep them coming. It really makes my day. If you want to be a patron, please go to patreon.com/OurFakeHistory. Find a level of support that works for you. Honestly, the patrons are what keep this show going. I cannot say thank you enough. So if Our Fake History means something to you, if you dig it and you want this show to keep coming, then please consider becoming a patron. You can also write a nice review for us on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify or on any of the other apps where they allow you to review the shows. Another great way to support the show is by buying Our Fake History merch. You can get merch for the holiday season, including the very popular new shirt that says Lying Sex Witch on it from our TeePublic store. The easiest way to get there is to go to OurFakeHistory.com and to follow the links to the store. There are tons of great designs, all created by our amazing in-house artist, Frank Fiorentino. If you ever want to get in touch with me, as I already said, you can send me an email at ourfakehistory@gmail.com. But you can also find me on Facebook, facebook.com/OurFakeHistory. You can find me on Blue Sky at Our Fake History. You can find me on TikTok at Our Fake History. You can find me on Instagram at Our Fake History. And we have a YouTube channel where I am putting the shorts that I have been making. So just go to YouTube and search Our Fake History. As always, the theme music for the show comes to us from Dirty Church. Check out more from Dirty Church at dirtychurch.bandcamp.com. All the other music you heard on the show today was written and recorded by me. My name is Sebastian Major, and remember, just because it didn't happen doesn't mean it isn't real.
Stream blockbuster hits like 21 Jump Street, Ted, The Expendables, and so much more on Pluto TV. Stream now, pay never.